I'm Nick Straker, I'm from London. I started in music at school with a guy called Dennis Bovell. We formed a band at school called Stonehenge that went on to become a band called Matumbi, which was a pioneering British reggae band in the early 70s. And I stayed with Matumbi for probably 2 or 3 years, and then started to do things for myself, which ultimately ended up with Walk in the Park.
Walk in the park. I've got to get some sense back into my head. I'm in the dark, and I can't see where I'm being led. I'd give the world to set the clock back and act like a man. Where can I turn to save myself from this confusion? A walk in the park, a step in the dark.
Before that, I was working with various people. There was a guy called Limmy from Limmy and the Family Cooking, that we went out with gigging and making a couple of records that didn't really do anything. But I had an arrangement with a studio, so that's why Walk in the Park became a Walk in the Park, because it was part of a project involving a few people. One sort of half of it split off to become New Music. I don't know if you remember New Music, who did Living by Numbers, and it was basically the same people that played on that and Walk in the Park. I was supposed to be part of the New Music project. I decided not to continue with the New Music. It wasn't really in keeping with what the New Music project was about, which was new music basically. It was very kind of at the early sort of new romantic kind of new wave of the very early 80s, and so Walk in the Park wasn't really like that. It was, and so, you know, I split off, which caused a bit of a ruckus. It didn't go down too well with certain people, but still, from my point of view, it was, you know, it was the right thing to do. I had to come up with a lot of Walk in the Park type tracks, and I found that very difficult, to be honest, because it wasn't really my cup of tea. I wasn't really listening to that kind of poppy, disco-y kind of stuff. My thing was fusion and jazz and stuff, so I had an idea one day to try and marry up sort of Euro disco with this kind of fusion jazz influenced stuff like Herbie Hancock and Weather Report and all this kind of stuff, and that's how a little bit of jazz came together, really. And somebody had a tape loop of a drum track, a literal tape loop, 1/4-inch tape, and then we span that onto a multi-track, and then worked from there. There was a sequencer part in it, which I played by hand, we slowed the tape down and I just played it by hand like this, and then sped it back up and then I came up with the bass line on the Prophet, and it just built from there. And it was a piece of self-indulgence. It wasn't really meant to be part of the Nick Straker Band thing. At the end, when we'd actually completed it, we had to do about a million edits, because it was all over the place, you know, because it started from scratch. We didn't have a song. The song came afterwards. we kind of built it up like that. And then when we'd finished it, I played it to the record company and they said, oh yeah, not bad. And it ended up on the Nick Straker, on the British Nick Straker album, and thought nothing more of it. And then we got contacted by Prelude, who'd heard it. I don't know how, but they had, and they said, we want to put it out. And the rest, as they say, is history. After a little bit of jazz, they wanted an album very quickly. So we came up, I enlisted some people, which turned out to be a bit of a mistake, because I was really up against it. We had no tracks.
It's breezing through the window. You run downstairs, you don't have a care. You're there, and if you feel the beat inside, your life will never be the same. Feel the beat inside, you might begin to understand.
So we came up with this stuff which was really, I don't know if you ever heard the album, it was not really that, it wasn't the right kind of thing. We went down the wrong sort of path, which was a bit of a disappointment really, but so it didn't really sell. I think we were in, I went over to do this sort of tour of Denmark. And while we were there, I don't know if you heard of Puck Studios. It's a residential studios in Denmark. It's quite a big place. The Spice Girls did their album there all those years ago. It's very big, plush, but at the time it was only a little 16 track. And we sort of demoed this kind of idea that we had, that with the guitar part and everything, and we had a basis for a track, so we put it down when we came back to the UK, and again it was built up from scratch, so that we fitted the vocals around the backing track that we had, so we had to edit, you know, about 100 edits in there to sort of fit parts, you know, together, and they ended up liking it. You know, Francois Kevorkian, we sent over the multi-track and he did a very good job.
Look straight ahead, keep moving straight ahead. Look straight ahead, keep moving straight ahead. Look straight ahead, keep moving straight ahead.
We had to go through the same process of finding which parts fitted where, but he did, you know, it sounded great, better than the job that we did, but the same format, but structure in terms of the song, but you know, sounded great, and that was what was released. It got to number 12, I think, in the dance chart there, and that was it. That track was, I still listen to that and think that's a good track, right? But the problem was, I think, that it, when it came out, it was a bit too late. also, you know I Like It, I think, was the same kind of. We collaborated quite well, Andy and I, on tracks. Neither of us were lyricists, and I used to get embarrassed about my lyrics, and so we kind of, together we could come up with something vaguely, that fitted the thing. I turned up for this photo shoot, and the guy who was my manager had managed to, unbeknownst to me, I didn't know anything about it in advance, but I turned up and there's this guy with all this suit carriers with stuff, and out came this very lovely brown sort of small check suit with this shirt with a kind of a turtleneck collar, and I said, "What's that?" He said, "This is this new guy. His name's Gianni Versace, right? And we've got this to use for today." I said, "All right, okay." So I put it on, and it looked really quite nice. And we gave the jacket. There were two girls there. One of them, my girlfriend at the time, Julie, and a model, and they wore the jackets. I wore the suit, and I, and I said, "How much is this then?" He said, bearing in mind this is 1983, he said 750 quid. So I said, "No, it's all right. Even I can't afford that." No, I mean, it was, pretty expensive, but very nice suit. Wish I could have kept it. He had to deal with, as a songwriter, with Virgin, and so that's what we did. We got together. He used to come round, and I played him some backing tracks sometimes, and he wrote songs around that, or we'd work something out around the piano. With Do You Want It Right Now, that was. I'd already had a backing track that I put together for something else. In fact, Turn Me Down, it's the same backing track.
You always turn me down. Why don't you stop playing with my senses? You always turn me down. I can never get by your defenses.
I mean, obviously the finished version of Do You Want It Right Now is not quite the same, but that's what he worked with. He worked with the backing track that I'd written for Turn Me Down. I'd done these arrangements and everything, and it got picked up by Jelly Bean and whoever. Quincy Jones was the executive producer because it was part of a movie. When I heard the finished track produced by Jelly Bean, they copied all my arrangements, which, got to be honest with you, I was quite chuffed about. But anyway, that's how that came together. After '83, I started to work with Linton Johnson, who's a dub poet, reggae dub poet, and with the backing band was called the Dub Band, which was Dennis Bovell's dub band. Dennis I'd known since school, and that's basically what I did. There was quite a lot of touring, which was great because we got to visit a lot of places: Iceland, South Africa, Brazil, you know, I mean, we went to America quite a few times. Yeah, it was pretty interesting. I mean, basically for 20 odd years, that's what I did.